Have you ever thought about what it really means to school failure? Well, currently there is no clear definition of the concept. It usually refers to the proportion of individuals who fails to complete compulsory studies, although it is sometimes extended to those who fail in post-compulsory secondary education. The point is that finishing school or dropping out are two basic events in a person's life, and in the case of the socially disadvantaged people, they have a greater impact. The socioeconomic level of belonging has been indicated on numerous occasions as the main predictor of school failure. So, to verify this information, we are going to study school failure in Spain. To begin with, we will be reviewing the different types of determining factors. 1. Individual conditions. There are 5 key factors identified by Berliner which are directly associated with child poverty. 1. Low birth weight can lead to decreased cognitive functions. This phenomenon is also much more frequent in situations of poverty. 2. Low medical care, which may be caused by low family awareness, can limit medical assistance in case of acute or chronic illnesses. 3. Poor nutritional conditions can cause a lack of physical and mental energy and a deficit of attention and concentration. 4. Low level of language and capacity for expression, which directly affect academic performance. 5. The stress produced by constant tension within the family can cause fear, anger, violence, and mental disorders that can affect school performance. Moving on, we need to highlight that poor students and those belonging to social minorities have low levels of self-control and academic self-efficacy, which causes less academic resilience and difficulties in increasing or maintaining self-esteem. Furthermore, we must also outline the effects of poverty on the brain, as children living in poverty have different neuronal characteristics from the rest due to the environment in which they develop. 2. Family conditions. They acquire great importance, since the role of parents stands out as a key element for children and also for the entire educational system. The educational level of the parents, especially of the mother, is the most direct factor, since it not only conditions the instrumental support that they can offer their children, but it also conditions their expectations, values, and attitudes in relation to education. These expectations also determine family-school relationships. Another heavy weight falls on the family environment. In the first place, we must take into account the family structure, since the more cohesive the members of a family are, the greater the transmission of knowledge, education, and skills. Then, the type of household. Non-traditional families are in a situation of increased risk. Students living in these families have a greater risk of school failure than in the case of single-parent families and, mainly, nuclear families. This is also directly associated with changes in coexistence models, which leads to painful processes that affect school performances. The number of siblings is also related to school performance. Since the higher the number is, the less attention that the family can devote to each of their children. In the same way, we must highlight the influence of the different parenting styles. The authoritative parenting style is the best option to educate a person, unlike the authoritarian style or the permissive style. The immigrant families constitute the most vulnerable group, especially if they are also socially disadvantaged. The migration process, with its personal cost and cultural shock, greatly affects adolescent students, and not speaking the native language fluently can have disastrous effects on social integration and, above all, schooling. 3. School conditions. We need to consider the ownership of the center. The difference in results between public and private centers is basically due to socioeconomic characteristics of their students and their environment, since students with familiar characteristics tend to concentrate in the same type of centers. This, as we can see, greatly benefits privately owned schools. The great repetitions also affects educational performance, being an ineffective resource to overcome academic difficulties. Getting students to stay on course contributes to reducing the chances of school failure. Another important factor is the management of the center. In the first place, in relation to educational resources, since their correct management and prioritizations leads to improvements, and secondly, in relation to the choice of the teaching team, as the level of involvement, training, and expectations of the teacher constitutes a big influence on the students' experiences, expectations, and academic performance. Then we find the school climate, that is, the relationships established between equals, students, teachers, and between different groups, student-teachers, teachers management. For example, the participation of families and the community in schools has beneficial effects on the performance and learning of students, especially those belonging to cultural minorities, also helping to overcome inequalities. Obviously, school failure does not only occur in environments with low socioeconomic status, so these factors are not exclusive to this context. And if they really end up being more unfavorable, it is because they accumulate a great number of variables characterized as risky. Now the question is there really a clear relationship between low socioeconomic levels and school failure? That is what we will study next, analyzing the case of Spain.
In order to do the comparison of school failure rates among different regions in Spain, we are going to be using this table, which represents the rates of students who didn't acquire the ESO title at the end of their academic stage. And as we wanted to show some sort of evolution, we are putting in contrast the data from the years 2000 in the green column, the year 2007 in the blue column, and the year 2014 in the pink column. And this table, in addition, also ranks the position of the different regions according to their percentages. So the first position corresponds to the one with the highest rate, and the 17th to the one with the lowest rate. So what this implies is that the closer to the first position, the worse. As we can see here, the region with the lower rate is País Vasco, but on the other hand, we have Baleares with a rate that is 3 times higher than this one. So therefore, the gap between these two is really big, and this gap has not been corrected throughout the years in question. Also, if we look into it, these two are the only regions whose positions have stayed the same throughout the 3 years analyzed. This map visualizes the information of the table above, and it shows the differences between the autonomous communities, which, if we think about, is reflected in a clear geographic divisions. The northern regions tend to perform better than the south central regions and the islands. So we can conclude that there has been a general improvement throughout the 14 years contemplated, as less regions remain orange in the map from 2014 than the one from the year 2000. Back to this graph, we can also analyze Spain's total average. So the total average of the country saw itself rise from 29.1 in the year 2000 to 30.8 in the year 2007, and then surprisingly lower down to 21.9 in the year 2014. In the year 2000, Andalucía, Baleares, Canarias, Castilla-La Mancha, Comunidad Valenciana, Extremadura, Galicia, and Murcia surpassed the country's average. So what this means is that their individual average was higher than the one from the whole country. Then 7 years later, in the year 2007, the number of regions with a higher average was 8, and in 2014 it was 8 as well, despite the reduction of the general percentage. This explains the decrease in orange-colored regions in the map shown above, but the permanence of regions with an average rate higher than the general average. So, although they were 8 regions with a percentage higher than the general average, the percentages were very, very much lower than the year 2007. And on the other hand, among the autonomous communities that have ended up with worse numbers than those with which they started, we have the example of Madrid, which started in position 15 in the year 2000 and ended up in position 12 in the year 2014, and also the case of Comunidad Valenciana, which in the year 2000 was in position 7 and was in position 5 in the year 2014. But nevertheless, the change here is slight, and so it isn't overwhelming. So the tendency from the year 2000 to the year 2014 is mostly linear, individually as well as altogether. So this is the conclusion which we reach.
Is the per capita income in each autonomous community related to their school failure rates?
For this, it has seemed essential to us to order the data in a table attributing to each community its number in a positive order, from the one with the lowest school failure rate to the one with the highest, and from the one with the highest income per inhabitant to the one with the least. We have then established a differential index between both magnitudes. This index will be 0 if they match, but it will be positive if the position in school failure is higher than in income, and negative in the opposite case. For example, the Basque Country occupies the first place in the two magnitudes, so its differential index is 0. However, Cantabria ranks number 2 in the school failure rate, while in terms of income it is number 11, so its differential index is 9. The Balearic Islands, meanwhile, rank number 17 in terms of school failure, but they are placed at number 8 in income level, so their differential index is of -9. The differential index allows us to have an overview of the situation and, at the same time, draws our attention to the cases that offer greater disparity, that is, those that do not conform to the basic hypothesis that correlate school failure with the level of rent. Once the data has been ordered, we can verify the initial hypothesis, which is that the school failure rate and the average income per person are two related magnitudes. There are only 3 autonomous communities that have a differential index of more than 4 points. However, we must keep in mind a very relevant fact. Only 2 autonomous communities exactly match in their position in the 2 variables studied. The Basque Country in the first place of both, and the Canary Islands in the 14th. This shows that, just as we can affirm that the income variable is related to the school failure rate, it is not the only one or totally hegemonic variable, since, if it were, there could be a much closer correspondence between the 2 positions. It seems necessary, therefore, to complete the initial premise with the reference to other factors that act on the problem of school failure and that can help to explain both the cases of clearer disparity between income and failure rate, as well as the other imbalances, less flashy but important, which we can see in the table. From the analysis of the data corresponding to 2014 between the early school living rate and the income level of the 17 Spanish autonomous communities, we can conclude that there is a relationship between both variables, but also that we need other factors that may explain some cases that do not fit that premise. First of all, the different structure of the labor market of the autonomous communities. In Spain, economic activity is very different between the different autonomous communities. For example, in communities such as the Balearic and Canary Islands, and to a lesser extent Catalunya, Valencia and Andalucía, the tourism sector carries enormous weight. It is a very dynamic sector that employs many people with very low demands for professional qualifications. Young people with difficulties, little motivation or little family support have the possibility of quickly joining the labor market, even in precarious conditions, abruptly abandoning their studies. This factor could explain the anomaly of the Balearic Islands, which, despite a high level of income, a place occupies the worst position in the terms of failure rate. Historical tradition of appreciation for education. In Spain, there have traditionally been great social differences between the north and the south. While in the north, in general, property has been more distributed and there has been less social difference, so that access to education has been more general and therefore there has been a greater tradition of appreciation for education. In the south, the differences have been greater, and there has traditionally been a greater amount of population without access to education. This is one of the factors that could explain the case of Cantabria, a northern community with an income level lower than others and which, however, is the second with the lowest school failure rate. Related to the previous factor, which distinguishes the southern communities from the northern ones, we have the climate factor. A warmer climate makes studying in the hot months more difficult and predisposes much more to social interaction, while a colder climate can favor staying home, studying or working.